be a real boy.
My diarist is still in a future where machines can feel and humans forget how to love. One boy's search for belonging blurs the line between artificial and alive. This is Cinema Reviews, and today we explored the haunting beauty of AI. Artificial Intelligence. AI. Artificial Intelligence is a 2001 American sci-fi drama directed by Steven Spielberg, based on Brian Aldiss's short story Super's Last All Summer Long. The film follows David, a highly advanced childlike android uniquely programmed to love, played by Joel Osment. After being adopted by a human family, David embarks on a moving journey to become real so his human mother will love him back. The film also stars Jude Law, Francis O'Connor, Brendan Gleeson, and William Hurt. The project began in the 1970s under Stanley Kubrick, who developed it for decades but believed technology wasn't advanced enough to realize his vision. In 1995, Kubrick handed the project to Spielberg, who completed the film after Kubrick's death in 1999. Released on June 29, 2001, by Warner Bros., AI earned $235.9 million worldwide against a $98 $100 million budget and received acclaim for its emotional storytelling, performances, and visual effects. It was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, a Best Visual Effects and Best Original Score, and has since been recognized as one of Spielberg's most profound and enduring works. Set in the 22nd century, AI. Artificial intelligence portrays a future where global warming has caused catastrophic floods, forcing humanity to rely on advanced humanoid robots called mechas. Among them is David, an experimental childlike android uniquely programmed to love. David is adopted by Henry and Monica Swinton, whose real son Martin lies in suspended animation due to a rare disease. At first, Monica is hesitant, but when she activates David's imprinting protocol, he begins to love her as his mother. With his robotic teddy bear companion Teddy, David becomes part of the family until Martin is unexpectedly cured and returns home. Martin's jealousy leads to a tragic accident that makes David appear dangerous, forcing Monica to abandon him in the woods rather than see him destroyed. Heartbroken yet hopeful, David sets out to find the mythical blue fairy from Pinocchio, believing she can make him a real boy so his mother will love him again. David's journey exposes him to the dark side of the human world. He escapes from the brutal flesh fair, where obsolete robots are destroyed for entertainment, and befriends Jigalo Joe, a charming mecca wrongly accused of murder. Together with Teddy, they follow clues to the flooded ruins of New York City, where David meets his creator, Professor Hobby. Hobby reveals that David was built to prove a robot could truly love, but when David discovers mass-produced copies of himself, he is devastated and attempts to end his life. Trapped underwater at Coney Island, David finds what he believes to be the Blue Fairy, a statue, and endlessly pleads with her to turn him human until his power fades. 2,000 years later, advanced mechas resurrect David and Teddy from the ice. Humanity is extinct, but these evolved robots, fascinated by human history, recreate David's home and bring back Monica from a preserved strand of her hair. Though she can live for only one perfect day, Monica spends it lovingly with David, finally telling him she loves him. As she falls asleep forever, David lies beside her, closing his eyes for the first time, at peace, loved, and finally human in spirit. The casting of AI, Artificial Intelligence, 2001, a comprehensive analysis. Introduction. Steven Spielberg's AI, Artificial Intelligence stands as one of the most ambitious and emotionally complex science fiction films of the 21st century. Released in 2001, this cinematic masterpiece represents the culmination of a decades-long development process that began with Stanley Kubrick and was ultimately realized by Spielberg after Kubrick's death in 1999. The film's success depended not only on its groundbreaking visual effects and profound philosophical themes but also on the careful selection of actors who could bring humanity to a story about artificial beings searching for their place in a world that may not be ready to accept them. The casting of AI, Artificial Intelligence, was a meticulous process that combined established stars with emerging talent, voice actors with physical performers, and dramatic gravitas with emotional vulnerability. This article explores the comprehensive casting decisions that shaped this landmark film, examining how each actor contributed to the movie's exploration of consciousness, love, and what it truly means to be human. The development history and its impact on casting. Before delving into the specific casting choices, it's essential to understand the unique development history of AI, Artificial Intelligence, as it significantly influenced the casting process. Stanley Kubrick acquired the rights to Brian Aldiss's short story Super Toys Last All Summer Long in the early 1970s, but the project languished in development for decades. Kubrick's perfectionism and his belief that computer-generated imagery wasn't advanced enough to create the child android protagonist, David, kept the project from moving forward. This extended development period meant that by the time Spielberg took over the project in 1999, the casting approach had to be reconsidered entirely. Kubrick had considered using a puppet or animatronic for David, never fully convinced that a child actor could convincingly portray an android. However, Spielberg made a crucial decision that would define the entire film. He would cast a human child actor in the role. This decision fundamentally altered the emotional core of the film and set the stage for one of the most memorable child performances in cinema history. Haley Joel Osment as David. The heart of the film. The casting of Haley Joel Osment as David represents one of the most inspired and crucial decisions in the film's production. At the time of casting, Osment was already an acclaimed child actor, having received an Academy Award nomination for his haunting performance in The Sixth Sense, 1999. Spielberg recognized that Osment possessed a rare combination of innocence, intelligence, and emotional depth that made him perfect for the role of an android child programmed to love. According to production materials, Osment was Spielberg's first and only choice for the role. This decision speaks volumes about Spielberg's confidence in the young actor's abilities. Unlike Kubrick, who had doubts about whether any child actor could convincingly portray an android, Spielberg saw in Osment the potential to create a performance that would blur the line between human and machine, making audiences question the nature of consciousness and emotion. Osment's approach to the role was remarkably disciplined and methodical. To portray David's artificial nature, he made conscious choices about his physical performance. He trained himself to avoid blinking as frequently as a human child would, creating an uncanny effect that subtly reminded audiences of David's non-human origins. He also programmed himself with perfect posture, maintaining an almost rigid uprightness that suggested mechanical precision beneath the surface of his childlike appearance. The young actor's preparation for the role was extensive. He had to learn to perform physically demanding scenes, including underwater sequences that required scuba certification. Every morning during production, Osment was sprayed with latex to give his skin a slightly artificial, porcelain-like quality that would register on camera and distinguish him from fully human characters. This dedication to the technical aspects of the performance, combined with his natural emotional intelligence, created a character that was simultaneously otherworldly and deeply relatable. Osment's performance carries the entire emotional weight of the film. David's journey from a newly activated android to a being capable of desperate love and crushing disappointment requires an actor who can convey complex emotions without the full range of human expression. Osment achieves this delicate balance, creating a character whose very artificiality makes his quest for acceptance and love all the more poignant. The decision to cast Osment rather than relying on special effects or animatronics proved to be one of the film's greatest strengths. His performance grounds the film's more fantastical elements in emotional reality, making David's suffering and longing feel genuine despite his artificial nature. Critics and audiences alike recognize the extraordinary nature of this performance, with Osment winning the Saturn Award for Best Performance by a Younger Actor for his work in the film. Jude Law as Jigalo Joe, charm and melancholy, while Haley Joel Osment anchors the film with emotional vulnerability. Jude Law brings charisma, charm, and surprising depth to the role of Jigalo Joe, a male prostitute android designed for companionship. Law's casting represents a perfect fusion of the actor's natural magnetism with the character whose artificial nature requires a performance that is both seductive and subtly mechanical. At the time of casting, Jude Law was emerging as one of Hollywood's most promising leading men, having garnered acclaim for films like The Talented Mr. Ripley, 1999. His ability to project both charm and underlying darkness made him ideal for a character who exists in the morally ambiguous world of mechanized sexuality while maintaining a core of dignity and unexpected heroism. Law's preparation for the role involved studying the movements and mannerisms of classic Hollywood dancers and entertainers. Specifically, he looked to Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, incorporating their fluid grace and choreographed precision into Joe's movements. This choice adds layers of meaning to the character. Joe moves like a performer from Hollywood's golden age, suggesting that he represents a romanticized, stylized version of masculinity and seduction rather than authentic human connection. The physicality Law brings to Jigalo Joe is crucial to the character's impact. Every movement is calculated, smooth, and slightly too perfect to be entirely human. Yet Law also infuses Joe with warmth and genuine care for David, creating a mentor-protector dynamic that gives the film much of its emotional resonance in the middle section. Joe becomes David's guide through a world that treats meccas as disposable commodities, and Law's performance must balance Joe's programmed functions with emerging genuine concern for the child android. One of the most remarkable aspects of Law's performance is how he makes Joe simultaneously artificial and empathetic. The character is explicitly designed for sexual companionship, yet Law never allows Joe to become sleazy or exploitative. Instead, he presents Joe as a professional taking pride in his work, a being who may be programmed for pleasure but has developed something resembling personal ethics through his experiences. Law's work in AI, artificial intelligence, showcases his versatility as an actor. He could easily have played Joe as merely charming or purely robotic, but instead he finds a middle ground that makes the character both believable as an android and compelling as a companion for David's journey. His performance adds levity to what might otherwise be an unrelentingly dark film, while never undermining the serious themes at the story's core. Frances O'Connor as Monica Swinton. The complexity of maternal love. Frances O'Connor's casting as Monica Swinton, David's adoptive mother, represents a crucial element in the film's exploration of love, loss, and the boundaries between programmed behavior and genuine emotion. The role of Monica is perhaps one of the most challenging in the film, as she must portray a woman who initially resists David, gradually grows to love him, and then makes the devastating decision to abandon him to save him from destruction. Before O'Connor was cast, the filmmakers considered several prominent actresses for the role, including Julianne Moore and Gwyneth Paltrow. Both actresses would have brought different qualities to the character, but O'Connor's particular blend of warmth and barely concealed grief made her the ideal choice for a character whose emotional journey parallels and contrasts with David's own. Monica's character arc requires an actress who can convey complex, often contradictory emotions. In the early scenes, she must show a mother still grieving for her seriously ill son, Martin, who was in suspended animation. Her initial coldness toward David isn't cruelty but self-protection, as she cannot allow herself to love what she knows is an artificial replacement for her real child. O'Connor plays these early scenes with subtle body language and carefully maintained distance, showing us a woman who recognizes the ethical and emotional minefield she's entering. The transformation that occurs once Monica activates David's imprinting protocol, the irreversible process that bonds him to her as his mother, requires O'Connor to show the gradual breakdown of her defenses. Spielberg uses close-ups to capture the moment Monica begins to see David not as a machine but as her child, and O'Connor's performance in these moments is extraordinarily nuanced. She allows us to see Monica's resistance crumbling, her maternal instincts awakening despite her knowledge that David is artificial. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of O'Connor's performance comes in the film's middle section. After Martin returns home cured, Monica must now navigate an impossible situation. She has two sons, one biological and one artificial, and their coexistence threatens to destroy her family. O'Connor plays Monica's growing desperation with heartbreaking authenticity. She loves David, but she must protect Martin, and the film forces her into an untenable position where any choice she makes will result in devastating loss. The scene where Monica abandons David in the forest is perhaps the film's emotional centerpiece, and O'Connor's performance is devastating. She must convey a mother's love even as she performs an act that will be perceived as the ultimate betrayal. O'Connor plays the scene with tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she tells David she loves him but cannot take him home. It's a masterclass in portraying impossible choices and the pain of sacrificing one's heart's desire for what one perceives as the greater good. O'Connor's work in AI, artificial intelligence, often goes underappreciated in discussions of the film, but her performance is essential to its emotional impact. She makes Monica neither villain nor saint but rather a flawed human being trying to navigate circumstances beyond her comprehension. Through O'Connor's nuanced portrayal, Monica becomes a tragic figure herself, a woman who found herself capable of loving an artificial being and was destroyed by that capacity for love. Sam Roberts as Henry Swinton, the voice of pragmatism. Sam Roberts plays Henry Swinton, Monica's husband and a professor who works for Cybertronics, the company that creates David. Henry's character serves as a more rational counterpoint to Monica's emotional journey, and Roberts brings a quiet authority and scientific curiosity to the role that grounds the family dynamic. Henry is the character who brings David into the Swinton home, seeing him as both a solution to Monica's grief and a test case for revolutionary technology. Roberts plays Henry as a fundamentally good man who perhaps doesn't fully consider the emotional ramifications of his decision. He approaches David with scientific interest mixed with genuine affection, but he lacks Monica's deeper emotional connection to the artificial boy. Roberts' performance is deliberately understated, allowing O'Connor and Osment to carry the film's emotional weight while Henry serves as the pragmatic voice of reason. When David's presence begins to threaten Martin's safety, Henry is the one who makes the hard decision that David must be returned to Cybertronics for deactivation. Roberts plays this scene with visible conflict. Henry has grown fond of David, but his primary loyalty is to his biological son and his wife's well-being. The character of Henry represents the scientific establishment's view of androids as sophisticated tools rather than beings worthy of moral consideration. Yet Roberts ensures that Henry never comes across as cold or cruel. Instead, he's a man trying to make rational decisions in an emotionally charged situation, someone who understands the technology but perhaps underestimated the human capacity to form emotional bonds with artificial beings. Jake Thomas as Martin Swinton, jealousy and humanity's darker nature. Jake Thomas portrays Martin Swinton, the Swinton's biological son whose unexpected recovery from cryogenic suspension creates the central conflict of the film's second act. Martin's character is crucial to the film's examination of human nature, as he represents the darker aspects of childhood and jealousy, cruelty, and the instinctive need to establish dominance and belonging. Thomas's performance required him to play a character who is simultaneously a victim, having survived a life-threatening illness, and an antagonist, whose actions directly lead to David's abandonment. Martin's jealousy of David manifests in increasingly dangerous games and manipulations, testing David's programming and inadvertently revealing the android's capacity for actions that can be interpreted as threatening. The young actor brings a realistic portrayal of sibling rivalry taken to an extreme. Martin isn't evil, he's a child who has returned from a near-death experience to find an artificial replacement has taken his place in his mother's affections. Thomas plays Martin's actions with a combination of childish thoughtlessness and deliberate malice, creating a character who is disturbingly believable. One of Martin's most significant scenes involves goading David into cutting a lock of Monica's hair, and later, during a pool party, poking David with a knife. Thomas plays these scenes with the casual cruelty of a child who doesn't fully understand the consequences of his actions but knows he's causing disruption. His performance raises uncomfortable questions about human nature and whether Martin's behavior toward David differs fundamentally from how humans have historically treated those they consider other or threatening. William Hurt as Professor Alan Hobby. The creator and his creation. William Hurt's portrayal of Professor Alan Hobby, David's creator and the genius behind Cybertronics android technology, brings gravitas and philosophical weight to the film's final act. Hurt's distinguished career and ability to convey intellectual depth made him perfect for a character who represents both godlike creation and tragically human grief. Professor Hobby's revelation late in the film that David was designed in the image of Hobby's own deceased son recontextualizes the entire story. Hurt plays this revelation with quiet pain, showing us a man who has channeled his grief into technological achievement, creating beings capable of love but perhaps doomed to suffer precisely because of that capacity. Hurt's performance is deliberately measured and thoughtful. Hobby speaks with the careful precision of a scientist, but Hurt allows glimpses of the bereaved father beneath the professional exterior. When Hobby tells David that their meeting demonstrates David's capacity for love and desire, proving the success of Hobby's work, Hurt plays the scene with a mixture of scientific satisfaction and deep melancholy. He has succeeded in creating artificial life that can love, but in doing so, has he created beings capable of suffering? The philosophical questions raised by Hobby's character are among the film's most profound, and Hurt's performance ensures these questions resonate. His Hobby is neither mad scientist nor benevolent creator but rather a complex figure whose motivations blend brilliance, grief, and perhaps hubris. Hurt makes us understand Hobby's vision while also questioning the ethics of creating beings designed to love beings who may not love them back. Brendan Gleeson as Lord Johnson Johnson, the face of hatred. Brendan Gleeson brings his considerable presence to the role of Lord Johnson Johnson, the ringmaster of the Flesh Fair, a traveling spectacle where obsolete or malfunctioning meccas are destroyed for human entertainment. Gleeson's character represents humanity's fear and hatred of artificial intelligence, channeling societal anxiety about technology and unemployment into violent spectacle. Gleeson plays Lord Johnson Johnson with evangelical fervor, treating the destruction of mechas as both entertainment and moral crusade. His performance is intentionally theatrical and over-the-top, suggesting a charlatan preacher exploiting human fears for profit and power. Yet Gleason also suggests that Johnson genuinely believes in his cause. He sees mechas as threats to human supremacy and dignity, and their destruction as a righteous act. The flesh fair sequences are among the film's most disturbing, and Gleason's performance is crucial to their impact. He must make us understand the human perspective that sees mechas as dangerous competitors for jobs and affection, while also highlighting the cruelty and injustice of that perspective. Gleason plays these scenes with such conviction that we believe Johnson believes every word, even as we recognize the horrific implications of his ideology. When the crowd at the flesh fair revolts and refuses to let David be destroyed, moved by his childlike pleading for his life, Gleason's reaction is perfectly calibrated. Johnson is genuinely shocked that his audience has been swayed by a machine's performance of emotion, and Gleason shows us a man whose worldview has been momentarily shaken. It's a brief but powerful moment that suggests even the most ardent anti-mecha crusader might recognize something worth preserving in these artificial beings. Voice cast, bringing characters to life through sound while the physical performances in AI, artificial intelligence are crucial. The film also features several notable voice performances that contribute significantly to its emotional landscape and world building. Jack Angel as Teddy. Jack Angel provides the voice of Teddy, David's companion throughout his journey, a super toy teddy bear with consciousness and loyalty that proves more constant than most of the humans David encounters. Angel's work on Teddy is particularly remarkable because he recorded all his lines out of context, receiving only the direction to sound like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, but very wise and old and stoic. Despite these limitations, Angel created a fully realized character. Teddy's voice is world-weary yet gentle, suggesting a being who has seen much but maintains an unwavering commitment to protecting David. Angel's delivery of lines like "I am not the toy" carries unexpected weight, reminding us that even this seemingly simple character possesses consciousness and dignity. The relationships between David and Teddy, brought to life through Osment and Angel's performances, provides the film with its most consistent source of unconditional love. While humans repeatedly fail David, Teddy remains loyal, and Angel's voice work gives this loyalty emotional resonance without sentimentality. Robin Williams as Dr. No. Robin Williams voices Dr. No, a holographic answer engine modeled after Albert Einstein that David and Joe consult in their search for the Blue Fairy. Williams' casting represents a clever piece of metatextual commentary, a comedian known for his improvisational genius and manic energy, lending his voice to an artificial construct designed to provide information. Williams plays Dr. No with appropriate theatrical flair, treating the role as performance within the film's universe. The holographic nature of the character allows Williams to indulge in verbal flourishes and dramatic gestures, creating a character that is obviously artificial yet engaging. Dr. No exists as entertainment as much as information source, and Williams' performance reflects this dual purpose. The scenes with Dr. No are among the film's more overtly humorous moments, providing relief from the emotional intensity of David's journey. Williams brings his characteristic energy to the role while remaining within the parameters of an personality, creating a character that is memorable despite limited screen time. Ben Kingsley as the Specialist. Ben Kingsley provides the voice of the Specialist, one of the highly evolved mechas who discovered David 2,000 years in the future. Kingsley's distinguished voice and ability to convey both authority and compassion make him ideal for representing this advanced civilization. The Specialist must explain to David the impossibly that Monaco cannot truly be brought back, that he cannot become a real boy, but that the evolved mechas can give him one perfect day with a recreated version of his mother. Kingsley delivers this information with a combination of gentleness and inevitability, making the film's controversial ending emotionally satisfying rather than saccharine. Kingsley's voice work in these final scenes is crucial to the film's emotional resolution. He must convey beings so advanced they seem almost divine, yet who retain enough connection to their mechanical origins to understand David's quest and desire to help him find peace. Kingsley achieves this balance beautifully, making the future mechas feel genuinely otherworldly yet motivated by something recognizable as compassion. Meryl Streep as the Blue Mecha. Meryl Streep lends her voice to the Blue Mecha, the evolved artificial being who appears to David in the form of the blue fairy from Pinocchio. Streep's brief appearance carries significant weight due to her stature as one of cinema's greatest actresses and the symbolic importance of the blue fairy character to David's quest. The blue fairy represents David's deepest desire transformation into a real boy so that he can win Monica's love. When the blue mecca, taking this form to communicate with David, must explain that this transformation is impossible. Streep's delivery is both gentle and devastating. She conveys an entity that understands human fairy tales and myths, and recognizes their power even as she must deny their impossible promises. Streep's participation, even in this limited capacity, lends gravitas to the film's final act and reinforces the thematic connection between AI and the Pinocchio story that inspired much of its narrative. Chris Rock as the comedian robot. Chris Rock voices a comedian robot briefly seen in the Rouge City sequence. While Rock's appearance is brief, his casting reflects the film's world-building in a future where androids served various functions. Entertainment meccas would certainly exist. Rock brings his distinctive voice and comedic timing to the role, creating a character that feels like a logical extension of his stand-up persona into android form. The comedian robot serves as a reminder that not all mechas are designed for labor or companionship, as some exist purely for entertainment, raising questions about the nature of creativity and whether programmed humor differs fundamentally from human comedy. Supporting cast. Building a world beyond the principal cast. AI. Artificial intelligence features numerous supporting players who help create the film's richly detailed future world. Ken Liu, Matt Winston, Eugene Osment, and Clark Gregg as Cybertronics employees. These actors portray various employees at Cybertronics Corp., the company that creates David. Their presence helps establish the corporate and scientific infrastructure behind android creation, showing us that David isn't the product of one man's genius but rather a complex technological and commercial enterprise. Notably, Eugene Osment, Haley Joel Osment's father, appears among the Cybertronics employees, adding a personal connection to the film's production that mirrors the themes of family and belonging explored in the narrative. Enrico Colantoni as a murderer. Enrico Colantoni plays a murderer who frames Jigalo Joe for his crime, setting Joe on the run and eventually leading to his partnership with David. Colantoni's brief appearance establishes the seedy underbelly of the film's future world and demonstrates how easily mechas can be scapegoated for human crimes. Ashley Scott as Jigalo Jane. Ashley Scott portrays Jigalo Jane, a female counterpart to Jude Law's Jigalo Joe. Her appearance helps establish that love and sex mechas come in various forms, designed to appeal to different preferences and desires. Scott's performance mirrors Law's stylized charm, suggesting these androids are manufactured according to specific templates and programming. Catherine Morris as Teenage Honey. Catherine Morris appears as Teenage Honey, another mecha designed for companionship. Her presence in the Rouge City sequences helps populate the film's vision of a future where android companions are commonplace, raising questions about the nature of relationships and genuine connection. Adrian Grenier as Teen Invent. Adrian Grenier appears briefly as one of the teenagers at Martin's pool party. His scene, where Martin's friends demonstrate casual cruelty toward David, serves to establish the widespread prejudice and thoughtless treatment mechas receive from humans. Paula Malcolmson as Patricia. In the mirrored room. Paula Malcolmson plays Patricia, one of the figures David encounters in his journey. Her brief appearance contributes to the film's exploration of how mechas navigate a world designed by and for humans. Sabrina Gradevich and April Grace. These actresses appear as colleagues and associates in various scenes, helping to populate the film's world with realistic background characters who make the future setting feel lived in and believable. The casting process. Behind the scenes, the casting of AI, artificial intelligence, was complicated by the film's unusual production history, with Kubrick's original vision calling for extensive use of puppetry and special effects, and Spielberg's decision to rely more heavily on human actors. The entire approach to casting had to be reconsidered. Spielberg's confidence in casting Haley Joel Osment rather than attempting to create David through special effects proved to be a watershed decision that influenced all subsequent casting choices. By placing a human child at the center of the story, Spielberg committed to a more emotional, humanistic approach that required actors capable of delivering nuanced, complex performances rather than simply providing voices for CGI creations. The casting process sought actors who could convey both the artificial nature of their mecca characters and the emerging consciousness and emotion that make those characters sympathetic. This required a delicate balance. Performances too robotic would alienate audiences, while performances too human would undermine the film's central questions about the nature of consciousness and love. For the human characters, the casting prioritized actors who could convey complex, often contradictory emotions. Frances O'Connor's Monica must love David while knowing he's artificial, then abandon him while still loving him. Sam Roberts' Henry must balance scientific curiosity with paternal feelings and ultimate pragmatism. These roles required actors capable of subtle, layered performances that would stand up to Spielberg's trademark close-ups and emotional intensity. Legacy and impact of the cast. The cast of AI, artificial intelligence, created performances that have endured in the minds of audiences more than 2 decades after the film's release. Haley Joel Osment's David remains one of the most memorable child performances in science fiction cinema, a character whose artificial nature makes his quest for love and acceptance even more poignant. Jude Law's Jigalo Joe demonstrated the actor's range, showing he could play a sexualized android with charm and dignity while maintaining the character's essential artificiality. Frances O'Connor delivered one of the film's most underrated performances, portraying a mother pushed to impossible choices with heartbreaking authenticity. The supporting cast, from William Hurt's grieving creator to Brendan Gleeson's demagogue showman, populated the film's world with memorable characters who raised profound questions about consciousness, prejudice, and the boundaries between human and artificial. Conclusion. The casting of AI, artificial intelligence, represents a masterclass in matching actors to challenging material. From Haley Joel Osment's central performance as David to the supporting players who populated the film's richly detailed world, every casting choice served the film's ambitious exploration of consciousness, love, and what it means to be human. Spielberg's decision to trust human actors rather than relying primarily on special effects created a film that resonates emotionally in ways that a more effects-driven approach might not have achieved. The cast brought vulnerability, complexity, and authentic emotion to roles that could easily have become mere technical exercises, creating characters that continue to provoke thought and feeling more than 2 decades after the film's release. The ensemble cast of AI, artificial intelligence, proved that even in a science fiction epic filled with visual wonders and philosophical complexities, the human element, or perhaps more accurately, the performance element, remains paramount. These actors created a film that asks profound questions about consciousness and love while never losing sight of the emotional truth at its core, that the capacity to love, whether programmed or evolved, comes with the capacity to suffer, and perhaps that capacity for suffering is what defines consciousness itself. Through careful casting and powerful performances, AI, artificial intelligence, achieved what its protagonist David could not. It became real in the hearts and minds of audiences, creating emotional connections that transcend the boundary between artificial narrative and genuine feeling. In doing so, the film and its cast created a work that continues to resonate as we grapple with increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence in our own world, making the casting choices of 2001 remarkably prescient for the questions we face today. AI, Artificial Intelligence, 2001, a comprehensive production and reception analysis. Introduction. AI, Artificial Intelligence stands as one of the most unique collaborative efforts in cinema history, a film that bridged the creative visions of the 2 legendary directors, Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg. Released in 2001, this science fiction drama tells the poignant story of David, a childlike android programmed with the ability to love, portrayed by Haley Joel Osment. The film's journey from conception to completion spans nearly 3 decades and represents a fascinating case study in artistic collaboration, technological innovation, and the evolution of filmmaking itself. Set in a futuristic world where rising sea levels from global warming have devastated coastal cities and advanced humanoid robots called mechas serve various societal functions, AI explores profound questions about consciousness, humanity, and the nature of love. The film follows David as he embarks on a quest to become a real boy, inspired by the tale of Pinocchio, hoping to regain the love of his human mother, Monica. This article examines the extensive production history of AI, artificial intelligence, from its development and pre-production phases through filming, post-production, and musical composition. It also analyzes the film's theatrical and home media releases, and explores its complex reception, including box office performance and critical response, a reception that has evolved significantly in the years since its initial release. Production development and pre-production. The Kubrick years, late 1970s, 1999. The genesis of AI, artificial intelligence, began in the late 1970s when Stanley Kubrick, the visionary director behind 2001, A Space Odyssey and The Shining, acquired the rights to Brian Aldiss's 1969 short story Super Toys Last All Summer Long. This deceptively simple tale about a robot child and his artificial teddy bear captured Kubrick's imagination, and he immediately recognized its potential as a feature film exploring themes of consciousness, love, and artificial life. Kubrick hired Aldiss himself to write the initial film treatment, marking the beginning of what would become one of the longest development processes in cinema history. However, the collaboration between director and author proved contentious. In 1985, Kubrick made an audacious move. He asked Steven Spielberg to direct the film, with Kubrick himself serving as producer. Warner Brothers agreed to co-finance the project and handle distribution duties, lending institutional support to this ambitious undertaking. Despite this arrangement, creative differences led to Aldiss being fired from the project in 1989. Kubrick's demanding perfectionism and specific vision for the material created friction with the original author. Aldiss later remarked bitterly about the experience, noting that not only was he dismissed, but Kubrick then hired Ian Watson, whom Aldiss considered an enemy, as his replacement. Bob Shaw briefly stepped in as writer after Aldiss's departure but lasted only 6 weeks, unable to keep pace with Kubrick's exhausting work schedule and exacting standards. In March 1990, Ian Watson officially took over writing duties, beginning a collaboration that would ultimately shape the final film far more than many realize. Kubrick's approach to Watson was characteristically eccentric and inspired. He handed the writer Carlo Collodi's The Adventures of Pinocchio, calling AI a picaresque robot version of Pinocchio. This comparison would prove central to the film's structure and thematic concerns. Watson worked intensively on the project, delivering his first story treatment just 3 weeks after being hired. He concluded his primary work on AI in May 1991 with a comprehensive 90-page treatment that would remain remarkably faithful to the eventual film version. One of Watson's most significant contributions came in reimagining the character of Jigalo Joe, originally conceived as a GI government issue, mecca, a military robot. Watson suggested transforming the character into a male prostitute robot. This change added layers of commentary on commodification, sexuality, and the diverse roles robots might play in a future society. Kubrick reportedly joked about the change, saying, "I guess we lost the kiddie market," acknowledging that this decision moved the project further from conventional family entertainment. The film then languished in what is commonly called development hell. Kubrick himself set the project aside to work on a film adaptation of Wartime Lies, partly because he felt computer animation technology had not advanced sufficiently to create the David character convincingly. Kubrick believed that no child actor could adequately portray the subtleties of a robot child. Yet the special effects of the early 1990s were not sophisticated enough to create a believable digital child character. The release of Spielberg's Jurassic Park in 1993 changed the equation dramatically. The film's groundbreaking use of computer-generated imagery demonstrated that CGI technology had reached a new level of sophistication. In November 1993, it was announced that production of AI would begin in 1994. With visual effects supervisors Dennis Muren and Ed Gormana, who had worked on Jurassic Park, brought on board to help realize Kubrick's vision. However, Kubrick remained dissatisfied. He was displeased with the pre-visualization work done by Muren and Gorman, and balked at the enormous expense of hiring Industrial Light Magic and Stan Winston's studio. The perfectionist director continued to refine his vision, commissioning hundreds of drawings and storyboards while searching for the right approach to bring his ambitious project to life. In early 1994, the film entered pre-production with Christopher Fangorn Baker as concept artist. Kubrick also brought in Zora Maitland to assist with the story, giving it what she described as a feminist fairy tale focus. Significantly, Maitland later recalled that Kubrick never referred to the project as AI but always as Pinocchio, underscoring how central the Collodi story remained to his conception. Chris Cunningham became the new visual effects supervisor, bringing fresh ideas to the project. Some of his unproduced work for AI can be seen on the Work of Director Chris Cunningham DVD, offering tantalizing glimpses of what Kubrick's version might have looked like. The director also had Joseph Mazzello do a screen test for the lead role, and Cunningham helped assemble a series of little robot-type humans to test whether the David character could be realized through sophisticated puppetry. Producer Jen Harlan later reflected on these experiments. "We tried to construct a little boy with a movable rubber face to see whether we could make it look appealing, but it was a total failure. It looked awful." Hans Moravec, a pioneering researcher in robotics and artificial intelligence, was brought in as a technical consultant, lending scientific credibility to the project's speculative technology. Despite all this preparation and experimentation, Kubrick and Harlan gradually came to believe that AI would be closer to Steven Spielberg's sensibilities as a director. Kubrick formally offered the directing position to Spielberg in 1995. Spielberg, however, was reluctant to take over his friend's passion project. He chose to direct other films instead and convinced Kubrick to remain as director. The film was then put on hold as Kubrick committed to completing Eyes Wide Shut, which would ultimately be his final film. Producer Jen Harlan described a crucial meeting about the project. Stanley showed Steven 650 drawings which he had, and the script and the story, everything. Stanley said, "Look, why don't you direct it and I'll produce it?" Steven was almost in shock. This account reveals both the depth of Kubrick's preparation and his genuine belief that Spielberg was the right director for this particular story. The Spielberg era, 1999 to 2000, Stanley Kubrick died in March 1999, shortly after completing work on Eyes Wide Shut. His death sent shockwaves through the film community and left several projects, including AI, in uncertain limbo. However, Jen Harlan and Christiane Kubrick approached Spielberg to take over the director's position, hoping to see Stanley's vision realized on screen. By November 1999, Spielberg had committed to the project and was writing the screenplay based on Watson's 90-page treatment. This marked Spielberg's first solo screenplay credit since Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, underscoring how personally invested he was in honoring Kubrick's vision while also making the material his own. Pre-production was briefly halted in February 2000 as Spielberg pondered directing other projects, including Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Minority Report, and Memoirs of a Geisha. The lure of these other projects demonstrates the numerous directions Spielberg's career could have taken at this juncture. However, the following month, he announced that AI would be his next project, with Minority Report to follow. When Spielberg decided to fast-track AI, he brought back Chris Baker as concept artist, ensuring continuity with Kubrick's earlier development work. Ian Watson later reported that the final script remained remarkably faithful to Kubrick's vision, including a contrary to popular misconception of the film's controversial ending. Watson stated, "The final 20 minutes are pretty close to what I wrote for Stanley, and what Stanley wanted, faithfully filmed by Spielberg without added schmaltz." Zora Maitland confirmed that Kubrick's version ended the same way Spielberg's does, with advanced mechas reviving Monica, but only for a single day. This detail is particularly significant given later critical debates about the film's conclusion, with many reviewers incorrectly attributing the emotional ending to Spielberg's supposedly more sentimental sensibilities. The original production start date was set for July 10, 2000, but filming was delayed until August of that year. The production would ultimately shoot for several months, primarily using controlled studio environments to create the film's futuristic world. Filming principal photography for AI. Artificial intelligence began in August 2000 and employed a distinctive production approach that reflected both Spielberg's efficiency and Kubrick's influence on the project's aesthetic and methodology. The film was shot almost entirely on sound stages at Warner Brothers Studios and at the Spruce Goose Dome in Long Beach, California. This massive hangar, originally built to house Howard Hughes's enormous HK-1 Hercules aircraft, provided the cavernous space needed for some of the film's most elaborate sets. The only significant location shooting occurred over a couple of weeks at Oxbow Regional Park in Oregon, used for the forest sequences where Monica abandons David. Spielberg adopted an approach that seemed deliberately intended to honor Kubrick's famously secretive working methods. He refused to provide a complete script to cast and crew members, banning press from the set and requiring actors to sign confidentiality agreements. This level of secrecy was unusual for a Spielberg production but entirely consistent with how Kubrick had operated throughout his career. Jack Angel, who provided the voice for Teddy the robotic teddy bear, experienced this secretive approach firsthand. Angel recorded his lines entirely out of context, receiving only the direction to sound like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, except very wise and old and stoic. Despite this fragmented approach, Spielberg requested that Angel be present on set every day to make line alterations wherever necessary, ensuring that Teddy's character would integrate naturally with the live-action performances. Social robotics expert Cynthia Breezel served as technical consultant during production, providing scientific grounding for the film's depiction of artificial intelligence and robot behavior. Her expertise helped ensure that the mecha's movements and behaviors remained consistent with plausible future technology, even as the film explored fantastical narrative territory. Costume designer Bob Ringwood approached his work with meticulous research, studying pedestrians on the Las Vegas Strip to inform his designs for the Rouge City sequences. This attention to detail helped create a believable future world where fashion and culture had evolved in recognizable yet distinctly alien directions. Haley Joel Osment, fresh from his Oscar-nominated performance in The Sixth Sense, was Spielberg's first and only choice for David. The young actor prepared for the role with remarkable dedication, deliberately avoiding blinking his eyes and programming himself with a naturally perfect posture to convey David's artificial nature. This physical transformation was crucial to making the character believable as a sophisticated robot rather than simply a human child. Jude Law prepared for his role as Jigalo Joe, the charismatic lover Mecca, by studying the performances of Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. Joe's movements deliberately emulate the smooth, choreographed grace of classic Hollywood dancers, suggesting a robot designed to embody idealized human sensuality and charm. Frances O'Connor, Sam Roberts, Jake Thomas, William Hurt, and Brendan Gleeson rounded out the principal cast, with notable voice performances from Robin Williams as Dr. No, Ben Kingsley as a specialist, and Meryl Streep as Blue Mecca. Several other performers, including Chris Rock, were initially considered for different roles. Jerry Seinfeld was originally approached to voice the comedian robot before Rock was cast. Julianne Moore and Gwyneth Paltrow were both considered for the role of Monica Swinton before O'Connor was ultimately chosen. The film's production design incorporated numerous subtle homages to Kubrick's earlier works. Film critic A.O. Scott later identified sly references to A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, and predominantly 2001, A Space Odyssey, demonstrating how Spielberg wove visual tributes to his friend throughout the film. The production also incorporated literary references beyond Pinocchio. Dr. No quotes lines from W.B. Yeats's poem The Stolen Child in the film, "Come away, a human child, slash to the waters and the wild, with the fairy, hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand." This melancholic verse perfectly captures the film's meditation on childhood, loss, and the burden of consciousness. The Ministry, an industrial rock band, appears in the film performing What About Us? during the flesh fair sequences, adding to the dystopian carnival atmosphere of these scenes where obsolete mechas are destroyed for public entertainment. Post-production on AI. Artificial intelligence involved extensive visual effects work to realize the film's futuristic world and, perhaps most challengingly, to make certain practical effects invisible. PDI/DreamWorks provided in-house visual effects for the film rather than outsourcing to industrial light magic as Kubrick had considered during development. The visual effects team faced numerous technical challenges, from creating the flooded ruins of Manhattan to ensuring that Daddy appeared as a convincing animated character. One of the most painstaking aspects of post-production involved removing visible elements from shots. The physical Daddy puppet was controlled by rods during filming, all of which needed to be digitally erased in post-production. Additionally, since David is supposed to be a robot who does not breathe, visual effects artists had to remove any visible breath from Joe and Osment's performance via a meticulous task requiring frame-by-frame attention, particularly in the film's cold weather sequences. The film's most spectacular visual effects created the drowned New York City and the climactic sequence 2,000 years in the future when David is discovered frozen beneath glacial ice. These sequences required seamless integration of digital environments with practical sets and props. Visual effects supervisors Dennis Murin, Stan Winston, Michael Lantieri, and Scott Farrer oversaw different aspects of the film's effects work. Their combined expertise, drawing on decades of experience on films ranging from Star Wars to Jurassic Park to Terminator, ensured that AI's future world felt tangible and lived in rather than merely digital. The post-production process also involved sophisticated sound design to differentiate between human and mecha characters through subtle audio cues. The soundscape of AI carefully balances naturalistic human environments with the faint mechanical sounds that remind viewers of the mecha's artificial nature. Spielberg worked closely with editor Michael Kahn, his longtime collaborator, to shape the film's unusual structure. AI essentially functions as a picaresque narrative, following David through a series of distinct episodes as he travels from his suburban home through the Flesh Fair, to Rouge City, and finally to flooded Manhattan. The editing needed to maintain narrative momentum while allowing each sequence its own distinct atmosphere and thematic resonance. Music. The musical score for AI, Artificial Intelligence was composed and conducted by John Williams, Spielberg's frequent collaborator who has scored nearly all of the director's films. Williams approached AI with full awareness of its unique origins as a Kubrick-Spielberg collaboration, and he crafted a score that attempted to bridge both directors' sensibilities. Williams called his score an homage to Kubrick, and he deliberately incorporated elements that evoked the music Kubrick had used in his films. Specifically, Williams included echoes of G8 Pilgrimage Ligeti's choral music, which Kubrick had employed to haunting effect in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Per Kubrick's explicit request before his death, Williams also included a quotation from Richard Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier in the score. The soundtrack album was released by Warner Sunset Records in 2001, featuring performances by the Hollywood Studio Symphony. The album includes vocals by Lara Fabian on 2 songs and Josh Groban on 1, adding emotional texture to key moments in the film. The score balances several tonal registers: childlike wonder for David's early experiences, darker industrial textures for sequences like the Flesh Fair, electronic elements for the futuristic settings, and sweeping romantic themes for David's relationship with Monica. Williams's music helps unify the film's disparate episodes while maintaining the distinct character of each sequence. A limited promotional release was created as an For Your Consideration Academy promo during awards season, and in 2015, La La Land Records issued a complete score, allowing audiences to experience Williams's full musical conception for the film. Notably, while Ministry's performance of What About Us appears prominently in the Flesh Fair sequence, the song does not appear on the official soundtrack album, remaining purely diegetic music within the film itself. Released theatrical. Warner Brothers and DreamWorks Pictures carefully orchestrated the theatrical release of AI, Artificial Intelligence, beginning with the strategic marketing campaign that emphasized the film's unique heritage as a Kubrick-Spielberg collaboration while avoiding positioning it as a conventional family entertainment. The teaser trailer debuted on December 8, 2000, attached to theatrical prints of Proof of Life. This early teaser generated significant buzz by emphasizing the mysterious, futuristic atmosphere of the film without revealing too much plot detail. The marketing campaign maintained this air of mystery throughout the lead-up to release. Warner Bros. Commissioned an innovative alternate reality game titled The Beast to promote the film, representing one of the first major uses of ARG marketing for a Hollywood blockbuster. Over 40 websites were created by Atomic Pictures in New York City, including a fully functional website for Cybertronics Corporation, David's fictional manufacturer. These sites, which were kept online at cloudmakers.org, created an immersive fictional world that extended beyond the film itself. There were plans for a series of video games for the Xbox console that would follow the storyline of The Beast, but these went undeveloped, representing one of the few elements of the elaborate marketing campaign that failed to materialize. Recognizing that AI's mature themes and somber tone might confuse audiences expecting typical Spielberg family entertainment, the studio made a deliberate decision not to create action figures or extensive toy merchandising. However, Hasbro did release a talking teddy toy following the film's release in June 2001, which became a modest collector's item. AI premiered at the Venice Film Festival in 2001, receiving its first public screenings to an international audience of critics and industry professionals. This prestigious premiere positioned the film as a serious artistic work rather than merely a summer blockbuster. The film opened wide in the United States and Canada on June 29, 2001, in 3,242 theaters. It turned $29.35 million during its opening weekend, debuting at number 1 at the domestic box office. This solid and spectacular opening reflected both strong interest in the Kubrick-Spielberg collaboration and some audience uncertainty about the film's unusual tone and marketing. In Japan, AI opened on 524 screens and grossed almost 2 billion yen in its first 5 days, marking the biggest June opening in Japan at that time. Remarkably, the film sold more tickets in its opening weekend than Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace had sold in Japan, though it grossed slightly less due to ticket pricing differences. The film went on to earn $78 million in Japan, demonstrating particularly strong appeal to Japanese audiences who may have been more receptive to the film's fusion of advanced technology with emotional storytelling. Home media: the home video release of AI artificial intelligence demonstrated the increasing importance of the DVD format in extending a film's commercial life and allowing for deeper engagement with its creation. DreamWorks Home Entertainment released AI on VHS and DVD in the United States on March 5, 2002. The DVD release was particularly ambitious, offering both widescreen and full-screen 2-disc special editions that included an extensive 16-part documentary detailing virtually every aspect of the film's development, production, visual effects, sound design, and music. The special edition bonus features included in-depth interviews with principal talent including Haley Joel Osment, Jude Law, Francis O'Connor, Steven Spielberg, and John Williams. These interviews provided valuable insights into the creative process and the challenges of bringing Kubrick's vision to life. The DVD also included 2 teaser trailers from the original theatrical release and an extensive photo gallery featuring production stills and, significantly, Stanley Kubrick's original storyboards. These storyboards offered fans a unique glimpse into how Kubrick had visualized key sequences and demonstrated the surprising continuity between Kubrick's conception and Spielberg's final film. The international release was handled by Warner Home Video, reflecting the split distribution arrangement between Warner Bros. And DreamWorks. This division of territories had been established during the film's development when Warner Bros. Agreed to co-finance the project. The film was released on Blu-ray in Japan by Warner Home Video on December 22, 2010. Taking advantage of the high-definition format's growing penetration in that market. This was followed by a United States release by Paramount Home Entertainment on April 5, 2011. Paramount distributed the Blu-ray because the company had acquired the rights to DreamWorks' pre-2010 live-action catalog. The Blu-ray release featured the film remastered in high definition, showcasing the visual effects and cinematography with greater clarity than previously possible. All bonus features from the 2-disc DVD special edition were carried over to the Blu-ray, ensuring that the comprehensive documentary record of the film's creation remained accessible to viewers. The home video releases allowed AI to find a broader audience than it had reached theatrically, and the extensive supplementary materials helped viewers better understand the film's complex production history and appreciate how closely Spielberg had adhered to Kubrick's original vision. The documentary segments featuring discussions of Kubrick's involvement proved particularly valuable in correcting widespread misconceptions about which elements of the film derived from which director. Reception. Box office. AI. Artificial Intelligence's theatrical run produced respectable but not spectacular box office results, grossing $235.93 million worldwide against a production budget estimated between $90 and $100 million. The film's domestic performance saw it earn $78.62 million in the United States and Canada, while the strong $29.35 million opening weekend at number 1 demonstrated initial interest. The film experienced steeper-than-expected drops in subsequent weeks. This pattern suggested that while core audiences who appreciated the film's artistic ambitions were enthusiastic, broader mainstream audiences found the film's tone and pacing challenging. Japan emerged as the film's strongest international market, ultimately grossing $78 million and nearly matching the entire U.S. domestic total. This exceptional performance in Japan reflected several factors: Japanese audiences' particular appreciation for stories about robots and artificial intelligence, the culture's comfort with melancholic narratives that blend technology and emotion, and strong promotional efforts in that market. The film earned an additional $79 million in other international territories, bringing its worldwide total to $235.93 million. While this represented a profitable outcome, roughly 2.5 times the production budget, it fell short of typical Spielberg blockbuster expectations. Minority Report, which Spielberg directed this following year, would ultimately earn more despite a similarly challenging tone, suggesting that AI's thoughtful pacing and ambiguous emotional register may have limited its commercial ceiling. Ian Watson, who wrote the original screenplay treatment, later speculated about the film's American performance. Worldwide, AI was very successful, and the 4th highest earner of the year, but it didn't do quite so well in America, because the film, so I'm told, was too poetical and intellectual in general for American tastes. Whether this analysis is entirely fair to American audiences is debatable, but the film did perform proportionally better in international markets, suggesting that its thematic concerns and narrative approach resonated particularly well outside the United States. The film's box office performance also reflected unfortunate timing. Released in late June 2001, AI had a relatively short theatrical window before the September 11 attacks fundamentally changed the American cultural mood. The film's meditation on loss, abandonment, and the search for meaning may have felt particularly difficult to audiences grappling with national trauma, though it was largely out of theaters by that point. Critical response. The critical reception of AI, Artificial Intelligence proved deeply divided upon initial release, with reviewers struggling to reconcile the film's unusual tonal blend and debating the degree to which it successfully married Kubrick's and Spielberg's sensibilities. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a 76% approval rating based on 201 reviews, with an average rating of 6.60. The site's critical consensus reads, "A curious, not always seamless, amalgamation of Kubrick's chilly bleakness and Spielberg's warm-hearted optimism. AI is, in a word, fascinating." On Metacritic, it received a weighted average score of 65 out of 100 based on 32 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C+, suggesting that mainstream viewers found the film more challenging and less satisfying than they had anticipated. Producer Jen Harlan stated that Kubrick would have applauded the final film, while Kubrick's widow Christiane also expressed her appreciation for AI. Brian Aldiss, despite his acrimonious departure from the project years earlier, ultimately admired the film. "I thought what an inventive, intriguing, ingenious, involving film this was. There are flaws in it and I suppose I might have a personal quibble, but it's so long since I wrote it. Regarding the ending, Aldous wondered how it might have differed had Kubrick directed, noting, "That is one of the ifs of film historia, at least the ending indicates Spielberg adding some sugar to Kubrick's wine." The actual ending is overly sympathetic and moreover rather overly engineered by a plot device that does not really bear credence, but it's a brilliant piece of film. A.O. Scott of the New York Times offered one of the most thoughtful initial reviews, recognizing the film's ambitious fusion of styles. Mr. Spielberg seems to be attempting the improbable feat of melding Kubrick's chilly, analytical style with his own warmer, needier sensibility. He tells the story slowly and films it with lucid, mesmerizing objectivity, creating a mood as layered, dissonant and strange as John Williams's unusually restrained, modernist score. Scott particularly praised the ending, writing, "The very end somehow fuses the cathartic comfort of infantile wish-fulfillment into the dream that the first perfect love whose loss we experience as the fall from Eden might be restored with a feeling almost too terrible to acknowledge or to name, refusing to cuddle us or lull us into easy sleep." Mr. Spielberg locates the unspoken moral of all our fairy tales. To be real is to be mortal, to be human is to love, to dream and to perish. Richard Corliss of Time magazine heavily praised Spielberg's direction along with the cast and visual effects, recognizing the film as a significant artistic achievement. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times initially gave the film 3 out of 4 stars, calling it wonderful and maddening. Significantly, Ebert later elevated his assessment, giving the film a full 4 stars and adding it to his great movies canon in 2011, writing that it represented one of Spielberg's most profound works. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader compared AI favorably to Solaris and praised both Kubrick for proposing that Spielberg direct the project and Spielberg for doing his utmost to respect Kubrick's intentions while making it a profoundly personal work. In 2009, Rosenbaum described AI as a very great and deeply misunderstood film, noting that critic Andrew Saris, experimental filmmaker Stan Brakhage, and film scholar James Narramore shared this assessment. Film critic Carmen White of the New York Press offered an especially enthusiastic review, noting that each part of David's journey through carnal and sexual universes into the final eschatological devastation becomes as profoundly philosophical and contemplative as anything by cinema's most thoughtful, speculative artists of Borzage, Osu, Demi, Tarkovsky. This comparison placed AI within the tradition of deeply humanistic, spiritually searching cinema rather than conventional science fiction. Filmmaker Billy Wilder hailed AI as the most underrated film of the past few years, while British director Ken Russell reportedly wept during the ending when he saw the film. These responses from distinguished filmmakers suggested that AI's artistic ambitions were particularly appreciated by those who understood the challenges of realizing such complex material. However, the film also received significant criticism. Leonard Maltin gave the film only 2 stars out of 4 in his movie guide, writing, "Intriguing story draws us in, thanks in part to Osment's exceptional performance, but takes several wrong turns ultimately. It just doesn't work." Spielberg rewrote the adaptation Stanley Kubrick commissioned of the Brian Aldiss short story Super Toys last all summer long. Result is a curious and uncomfortable hybrid of Kubrick and Spielberg's sensibilities. Maltin did praise John Williams's striking music score. Mick Lossale of the San Francisco Chronicle gave a largely negative review, stating, "AI exhibits all its creators' bad traits and none of the good, so we end up with the structureless, meandering, slow-motion endlessness of Kubrick combined with the fuzzy, cuddly mindlessness of Spielberg." Lossale dubbed it Spielberg's first boring movie and, like several other critics, mistakenly believed the advanced meccas at the film's conclusion were aliens rather than evolved robots, a fundamental misreading that colored his interpretation of the ending. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone gave a mixed review, concluding that Spielberg cannot live up to Kubrick's darker side of the future, though he still placed the film on his year-end top 10 list. David Danby in The New Yorker criticized the film for not adhering closely enough to his concept of the Pinocchio character, suggesting rigid expectations about how the source material should be adapted. James Berardinelli found the film consistently involving, with moments of near brilliance, but far from a masterpiece. He wrote, "In fact, as the long-awaited collaboration of Kubrick and Spielberg, it ranks as something of a disappointment." Regarding the finale, he claimed, "There is no doubt that the concluding 30 minutes are all Spielberg. The outstanding question is where Kubrick's vision left off and Spielberg's began." John Simon of the National Review described it as an uneasy mix of drama and treacle, reflecting a common critical complaint that the film's tonal shifts felt during are incompatible. A persistent theme in negative and mixed reviews was the assumption that the film's more emotional elements, particularly the ending, represented Spielberg softening Kubrick's harsher vision. This misapprehension became so widespread that Spielberg eventually addressed it directly. In 2002, Spielberg told film critic Joe, "People pretend to think they know Stanley Kubrick, and think they know me, when most of them don't know either of us. And what's really funny about that is, all the parts of AI that people assume were Stanley's were mine, and all the parts of AI that people accused me of sweetening and softening and sentimentalizing were all Stanley's. The teddy bear was Stanley's. The whole last 20 minutes of the movie was completely Stanley's. The whole first 35-40 minutes of the film, all the stuff in the How Ozzy was word for word from Stanley's screenplay. This was Stanley's vision." 80% of the critics got it all mixed up. Spielberg continued, "I'm the guy who did the dark center of the movie, with the flesh fair and everything else. That's why he wanted me to make the movie in the first place." He said, "This is much closer to your sensibilities than my own." This revelation fundamentally challenged conventional assumptions about the director's contributions, suggesting that Kubrick had wanted Spielberg precisely because the material required emotional warmth that Kubrick felt less equipped to provide. Spielberg later reflected, "While there was divisiveness when it came out, I felt that I had achieved Stanley's wishes, or goals." This statement suggests that Spielberg measured success primarily by fidelity to Kubrick's vision rather than critical or commercial reception. Zora Maitland, who worked with Kubrick on the project in the 1990s, complicated this narrative slightly by noting that Kubrick never started production on AI in part because he had a HAR. Review. 1. The opening vote tells us of a global warming that has led to the melting of polar ice caps and destroyed cities, NY, Venice, Amsterdam, and made natural resources a luxurious premium, to the point where human population must be controlled. The resulting impact on the economic and social structure is a world where robots become common tools that replace the resource-hungry human. The opening scene, with the benign godlike scientist Professor Hobby, played by William Hurt, talks to his young employee base of his company, Cryogenics, about his dream to construct a surrogate child robot, a robot that can be taught to love and be loved in turn. His dream has a twofold function: commercial, since it could lead to huge sales in a world where the population count is down, and purely a search for power, to play God by creating a robot that can, in effect, not only love but dream. In this respect, Hobby is a surrogate for Spielberg, who places great emphasis on his art to be a source for realizing dreams. When an employee asks Hurt what responsibility does a human have to a robot that genuinely loves, Hurt replies, "In the beginning, didn't God create Adam to love him?" The film skips ahead 20 months to accompany employee Henry Swinton, who has a son suspended animation awaiting the cure for his incurable illness, which makes him a prime candidate for the first mecca child, mechanical as opposed to organic, off the assembly line. The young couple of Monica and Henry Swinton, Francis O'Connor and Sam Roberts, are pegged to be the guinea pigs for the company prototype mecha child. Henry is quick to push the surrogate child onto Monica, who resists at first until her mother instincts take over. Once she says the 7 words that will imprint young David, Haley Joel Osment, into being Monica's long-lost love child, the cast has been dyed. David's first few days in play like the common a stranger and a strange land humor, but with some genuinely touching moments, like David's wonderful introduction to both the house and the audience. Spielberg places his camera up close on David's glossy white shoes as they step down onto the hardwood floor, perhaps in homage to 2001, and the cut to the close-up of a flight attendant's A-grip shoes. It cuts to a three-quarter shot of David, as he utters his first words, "I like your floor." Nothing like bringing such a momentous occasion literally down to earth. The experiment in surrogate parenting is made more difficult with the arrival of their son by birthright. Martin returns home after a cure is found for his illness. Expected sibling rivalry ensues, including a poolside scene where the innate cruelty of children comes to the fore, with Martin and his friends goading and insulting David. An accident caused by David leads to the near-drowning death of Martin, and the father's eventual decision that David is too dangerous and must be returned to the company, where he will be destroyed. Monica is entrusted with the task but cannot go through with it and instead leaves David stranded in the woods, along with his teddy bear, to live as a renegade mecca. At this point the film switches gear into David's journey of self-discovery. There are two fascinating aspects of this film: the aesthetic tension between Kubrick, who nurtured this project for over 20 years, and Spielberg, who took over the reins, with Kubrick's full consent, after Kubrick's death in 1999 to write, produce and direct. The common and often stated difference between two directors is one being the cold intellectual, Kubrick, and the other an optimistic sentimentalist, Spielberg, play out in a tug-of-war with neither camp winning out entirely. The Kubrick half keeps the film from succumbing to a common Spielberg pratfall of resorting to excessive sentimentality. The film also straddles, and one could argue is stronger for it, the divide between Spielberg's preferred classicism, belief in humanity, clarity of idea and resolution, transparent style, and Kubrick's tendency toward modernism, irony, relative value, distrust in humanity, rigorous formal style. The partial elements of postmodernism seem to be split across both directors, a sense of nostalgia with Spielberg and the bitterness and sense of relative value with Kubrick. Hence, while the core of the film remains pure Spielberg a boy's undying love for his mother to prove his humanity and win her unrequited love, there are enough touches of irony and a sense of bittersweet to appease the Kubrick fans of the equation. A second fascinating aspect of the film, apart from the stunning achievements of the well-oiled teamwork of the cinematography, art direction, set design and special visual effects, is the myriad of cinematic references that are invoked across the film, some directly and consciously, but a good many I would guess indirect. My sense is that much of this intertextuality is a result of the film percolating first in Kubrick's mind and then Spielberg's since the early 1970s. Like a sponge soaking in cultural and artistic ideas that were circulating during those times, spanning the tail end of high point of intellectually stimulating science fiction of the late 1960s, early 1970s, 2001, 1968, Planet of the Apes, 1968, Solaris, 1972, Silent Running, 1971, THX 1138, 1971, Zardex, 1971, A Clockwork Orange, 1971, The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976, to the more spectacular, special effects-dependent epics of the late 1970s, early 1980s, Star Wars, 1977, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977, Alien, 1979, Tron, 1982. Terminator, 1984, Brazil, 1985, to the mega-epics of the mid to late 1990s, Jurassic Park, 1995, 12 Monkeys, 1995, Independence Day, 1996, Starship Troopers, 1997, and The Matrix, 1999. The film is rich in thematic ideas, drawing on cinema history, mainly cinema of the fantastic, fairy tales, classical mythology, popular mythology and religion. As one scene followed another, I kept a running count of the films and ideas that came to mind, and the list included: 1. Ray and Wright, Busby Berkeley's Dames, 1934. The film sources the Dick Powell song I Only Have Eyes for You, an interesting choice for those who know what the song is about, and the Berkeley choreography, which includes dozens of women who look identical to Powell's love interest, Ruby Keeler. The notion of female conformity and the robotic, look-alike mise-en-scene makes for an apt reference point for AI. 2. The Adventures of Pinocchio, the 1883 children's novel by Carlo Collodi, along with the 1940 Disney animated adaptation Pinocchio, is perhaps the most evident and powerful influence on the film, given that the story is directly referenced in the film. In the classic story, woodcarver Geppetto, Professor Hobby in the film, makes a wooden boy named Pinocchio who, like the robot David, dreams of becoming a real boy. In the story, the blue fairy transforms Pinocchio into a real boy, but his transformation is only partially complete, as he must first go through a series of initiations and challenges to prove himself a real boy. Some of Pinocchio's journey into truth, identity and selfhood serves as an inspiration to the film. It should also be noted that the company that designed David has a logo in the shape of a winged bird, which echoes the blue fairy. 3. Todd Browning's Freaks, 1932, and David Lynch's The Elephant Man, 1980, are evoked namely in the scenes at the Flesh Fair, a celebration of life, where David, who looks more human-like than his more prosaic robot worker models, there is more than a hint of class conflict, class exploitation here, comes into contact with the harsher, uglier aspects of human nature. This also references Voltaire's classic 1759 satire of the innocent exposed to the cruel world. Candide. The robots are kept in zoo-like cages, gawked at and exploited for commerce. In one of the film's few offensive moments, a black robot is jettisoned out of a cannon. The way the robots bond together against their human aggressors recalls the similar interplay between humans and day freaks in the Browning and Lynch films. Also invoking the Elephant Man is the Victorian-styled bounty hunter character Lord Johnson Johnson, played by Brendan Gleeson, who captures renegade robots and sells them to a show business for profit. The Lord recalls the Victorian-era circus owner Bites, played by Freddie Jones, and the final scene where David sleeps like a normal person for the first time, and we presume he dies, recalls the ending where Merrick sleeps lying flat on his back for the first time, knowing the position will cause his death. Interestingly, Merrick's death is followed by a fantasy dream of his mother's face hovering in outer space, whereas in David's mind, lying down next to his dead/dying mother will lead to sleep, which he has learned is the place where dreams are born. Merrick's lying down to die leads to a final wish fulfillment dream of his mother materializing as a godhead. 4. The Lost City of Atlantis. There have been countless myths and tales from Plato, the Republic, onwards that recount the story of a lost underwater city, or in some cases continent. One of the most interesting, and lesser-known, cinematic uses of this utopian tale is the Soviet science fiction film Amphibian Man, 1962, Vladimir Chebotaryov, Gennady Kazansky, where a doctor plans to build a classless utopian underwater society. The fate of the water-circled city is noted in the opening voiceover of AI, which tells of natural catastrophes that have destroyed whole cities, citing Venice, Amsterdam and New York City. The underwater scenes where David searches for the Blue Fairy and finds her in the submerged remnants of New York City, Coney Island is noticeable, falls squarely into the tradition of this myth. 5. Tarkovsky's Solaris is another huge influence on, or mirror of, AI. For starters, there is the idea of the inhuman replicant, Hari, who is more openly expressive of emotions than her human husband, scientist Chris Calvin. The scene near the end, after the film has flash-forwarded 2,000 years to a post-human world, seems to draw, directly or indirectly, perhaps through Soderbergh's 2002 remake, from the surprise ending of Solaris, where what we believe to be Kelvin back on Earth at his parental country home, is in fact a materialization of this reality taken from his own mind on one of the planet's Solaris' many oceans. Spielberg draws from this reality simulacrum for the entire scene where the aliens recreate David's home, like a memory simulacrum, so that he can relive his dream of meeting his mother again. Like in Solaris, the depiction of the real place is estranged by subtle or little differences in visual representation. For example, the colors in David's home are saturated and garishly overdone through the cinematography. 6. Tarkovsky's first film Ivan's Childhood, made the same year as Amphibian Man, 1962, also features a young boy who is a perpetual daydreamer as the central protagonist. The ending of AI forms a strange echo to Ivan's childhood. At the end of Ivan's childhood, the boy Ivan dies in the hands of the Nazis, but lives on in an idyllic, posthumous fantasy dream memory where he lives forever on the beach with his friends and mother. Like David, Ivan's most idyllic memories center on his mother. In AI, David achieves his idyllic dream of being loved by his mother, if only for one day, as an alien-induced materialization based on a lock of her mother's hair that was kept by his mecha teddy bear, and David's own memories of her mother. 7. Frankenstein, James Whale, 1931, plus countless other remakes and sequels, and of course, the Mary Shelley novel from 1818. This story originated one of the most iconic and often used science fiction themes, that of the scientist playing the overachiever, who does what is the purveyance of God, to create human life from nothing. Professor Hobby plays the role of the godlike Victor Frankenstein, who creates life out of computer parts. The Frankenstein story also deals with a theme of parental responsibility. Once he creates his offspring, what does he do to shepherd him, or her, into the world? What in turn, are the responsibilities of the child to his or her parent? In the 1964 Hammer the Evil of Frankenstein, the monster is found frozen in a block of ice, and is thawed to life. This plot point is exactly what occurs with David, after he is frozen underwater for some 2,000 years and is brought to life with the illuminating touch of an alien's hand. The use of illumination to revive David also echoes the Kaleidai story The Adventures of Pinocchio. 8. Logette 8 tilde copyright. He is another major reference point for AI. It is invoked in two senses. David is like the tragic hero from Marker's film, who asks the superintelligent future human race to send him back to the past rather than the future, so he can live with the woman he loves. David is granted a similar wish by his alien protectors, who are an advanced race of Mecca, to be transported, in mind, back to the past life with his mother Manica, to live out a moment of perfection. The second possible allusion to Logette 8 tilde copyright. He references the single moment in that earlier film where still photographs give way to live action film. The action involves the said woman, lying asleep in her bed, slowly opening her eyes after a series of slow lap dissolves, we assume, in the presence of the hero. The framing and lighting of David's mother, when she wakes up to David lying next to her, recalls this defining moment from Logette 8 tilde copyright. 10. Much of the alien face and body makeup and special effects harks back to the android characters from Westworld. Michael Crichton, 1973. 11. The nighttime set design of the exuberant downtown city space where we first meet Jigalo Joe, Jude Law, who looks amazingly well suited to playing a mecha sex toy model. Rouge City has echoes of Blade Runner, 1982, and Absolute Beginners, Julian Temple, 1986. 12. The influence of Blade Runner can be felt elsewhere, as in the scene where the replicant Troy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, returns as the prodigal son to meet his maker, his god, the genius designer and owner of the Riddle Corporation, Dr. Ildon Tyrell, Joe Turkel. This is strongly echoed in AI in the scene where David, at the end of his journey, returns to meet his maker Professor Hobby. The outcomes are however vastly different. In Blade Runner, Batty returns to ask his maker why he was hardwired with a brief lifespan of 7 years, and ends up crashing his maker's skull. In AI, David returns for confirmation of his own uniqueness as a robot, and is distraught, to the point of attempted suicide, to learn that he is but a prototype of many Davids. With the pan of the camera along Hobby's night table and a family photograph of Hobby with his son, David, and we learn that David has been created in the image of Hobby's own son. David the robot exists as a living tombstone for the real David, as an eternal sign of human loss. Dylan, 132. Hobby's creation is successful, but too successful, for poor David's emotional connection to his mother. Odd that his love is drawn exclusively to his mother and not father, who in fact is the one who initiated the purchase of David, is too all-consuming to the point of being unhealthy. Can this over-sentimentalism toward his mother be seen as an unintentional auto-critique on Spielberg's part toward his own tendency to overplay emotion and sentimentality? In a moment of pure irony, David does finally achieve his goal of being unique, just not in the manner he had anticipated. When David is thought out from his 2,000-year slumber by the evolved alien form of Mecca, after the human race has died out, the aliens treat him as a unique being because he is the last specimen to have known living people like the tragic hero in Loget A tilde copyrightee, whose powerful memories of pre-apocalyptic Earth are used by the remaining humans to communicate with the future. The evolved Mecca aliens cherish David as a last survivor. As they say, you are the enduring memory of the human race, the most lasting proof of their genius. We only want for your happiness. David, you've had so little of that. While some detractors of the film have pointed to the ending as being typical of Spielberg's sprained optimism, a closer analysis reveals an emotional feeling quite different from joy or feel-good happiness. Yes, David does get to live one perfect day with his mother, unfettered by any competitor for his attention, her son Martin, her husband, or the quotidian aspects of the everyday. But at what cost and what context? Robot David has long outlived everyone, his real father Professor Hobby, his surrogate mother, father-in-half, brother Martin, the whole human race. As Dylan wonderfully writes, the conclusion, in which the robot becomes a boy in the presence of his long-dead mother, is the final aching impossibility. The teddy bear marching across the bed is a cloyingly Spielbergian touch. But even that cuteness cannot mask the powerful impression of evanescence at the end. Surely this is the fairy tale version of Tarkovsky's Solaris, p. 132. Perhaps it is the Kubrick influence, but Dylan argues that AI is far from a reassuring and redemptive take on history, memory and time, and that it is the only one of Spielberg's post-1990s films that represents a dislocation between past and present. p. 132. In comparison, Spielberg's films Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Amistad and Saving Private Ryan all circle around a film's loving memory, and the redemptive power of cinema. A broken bar. All idealize the continuity between past and present. A broken bar offers cinema as a salvic witness. p. 132. To conclude the study of AI's curiously rich allusions to SF cinema, in his fascinating book on the impact of Tarkovsky's Solaris on contemporary American cinema, The Solaris Effect, Art and Artifice in Contemporary American Cinema _ 2006, Steve Dillon writes of AI, a broken bar. I may well be considered a cinematic reenactment of remembered film images. p. 122. AI enacts a wonderfully conceived manifestation of self-reflexivity, a striking overlaps between form and content. p. 137. Citing visual effects supervisor Dennis Murin from one of the DVD extras, Dylan writes, a broken bar. The last section of the movie is almost entirely computer-generated, and in the story only computers have survived. This overlap seems suggestively self-reflexive, and therefore readable, but we still need to decide what the film might be saying when it self-consciously refers to itself. p. 137. In terms of philosophical, spiritual ideas, the film is most closely aligned with the Judeo-Christian worldview. Resurrections and Christ figures abound, but other myths and ideas are also invoked, like Homer's The Odyssey. The bulk of the film is David's quest to find the Blue Fairy, and subsequently his mother. While the alien's explanation to David, spoken by Ben Kingsley, at the film's end of the impossibility of repeating his life with his mother, because of time, space laws, recalls Henri Bergson's philosophy of time and memory, namely that every event from the past carries on through memory traces across space and time, but that no moment in time can ever occur again. Each moment in time is a unique moment. The question of uniqueness is also paramount in AI. Regardless of their debatable social or political merits of Spielberg's films, he has undisputed ability with the use of pure cinematic technique, style, and flair. I'll conclude with some visual stills examples of his clever and visually interesting iterations on the circle motif, which evolves throughout the film in its functional meanings. at times simply serving to isolate or highlight David in the frame, grant him a hallowed, spiritualized presence, or represent the grand circular path of David's journey, which begins with his imprint of a belonging to Monica and ends back with Monica. Review. 2 Set in the 22nd century where rising sea levels from global warming have wiped out coastal cities around the world, reducing the world's population, mecha humanoid robots are prevalent. In New Jersey, a prototype mecha child called David is given to husband and wife Henry and Monica Swinton after their son contracted a rare disease and has been placed in an induced coma. Monica initially feels uneasy with her surrogate robot child, but he desperately craves her love and over time she begins to warm to David. Everything changes, however, when Martin is unexpectedly cured of his disease and returns home. Martin becomes jealous of his new sibling and, after a series of incidents involving both boys, their mother becomes fearful of her family's safety. She drives David into the woods and leaves him there, on his own. David recalls a story he once read, a Pinocchio, and decides to set off on a quest in search of the Blue Fairy, hopeful that she can make him a real boy too. Initially developed by Stanley Kubrick before his death, and then taken up by Steven Spielberg, AI. Artificial intelligence is a fairy tale about love, identity, and family. Review. 3 Artificial Intelligence, 2001, by Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg. IMDb's short summary of the movie reads like this: a highly advanced robotic boy longs to become real so that he can regain the love of his human mother. That might be the plot of the movie, but beneath this masterpiece, which is based on Isaac Asimov's novel, there loom quite a few serious questions, and both the author and the directors play with some of our most ancient human fears. The more I touch upon Isaac Asimov, the more I wonder about his prodigy. Biochemistry professor and one of the most prolific science fiction writers of all time. I admit though that I will have to read his books, because one can clearly feel Mr. Kubrick's well-known negative outlook upon humanity throughout the movie. I enjoyed watching Kubrick's movies when I was young, but now at mid-age, I feel like he lacked until the end of his life necessary optimism. All his famous films like Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange or 2001, A Space Odyssey could well be labeled horror movies. If compared to Stephen King, for example, they seem to be much closer to our lives, situated somewhere at the margins of reality. I has two main themes: respect towards the dreams and desires of organisms in the widest sense, which we don't label human, and humanity's limited place in evolution. The first theme finds its climax in the pool scene, which reminded me somewhat of Django Unchained, where a few boys start to pick on the android David and draw a clear line between mecha, for mechanic and therefore not worthy of any respect, and orga, for organic and therefore part of the supreme human race. One could substitute mecha and orga with blacks and whites, slaves and citizens, rape and man during certain periods of our history. All these categories boil down to the same essence. Once an organism is excluded from our common myths of human rights and national constitutions, we seem to get a license to channel all our rage and frustrations against that individual or group of individuals. Asimov elaborated on this theme already in Bicentennial Man, which was turned 1999 into a movie, exhaustingly. The Fresh Flesh Arena, where expired or criminal androids are destroyed in a spectacle which is a mixture between a public medieval decapitation, a Roman gladiator games and a modern US-style wrestling competition, shows how that future society tries to vent its individual and collective psychopathological energies in a regulated albeit cruel method. The second theme dominates the later part of the movie and creeps in somewhat unexpectedly. Yes, artificial life enjoys a center stage throughout the movie, but only after our miserable android boy David has spent 2,000 years frozen at the bottom of the ocean being excavated in a futuristic archaeological site. We realize that the human race is extinct. Artificial intelligence shaped and slender, asexual humanoid bodies has evolved into the dominant life form. Evolution has seemingly eliminated all the negative characteristics of mankind. Our successors are intelligent beyond measure and emphatic beyond imagination. They recognize the android's psychological setup, that is only my mommy's love will make me happy, and try everything within their power to realize his dreams and fulfill his desires. A grand but frosty movie. I'm amazed how Spielberg managed, despite Kubrick's death, to match the master of gloominess directing style. Both film and book are great works of art. My criticism is therefore straightforward onto its relevance for our reality. Kubrick died too early as to enjoy the benefits of cognitive behavioral therapy. It would have been a pleasure to watch only one of his movies with an optimistic twist instead of all this predictable pessimism. As for Asimov's novel, I have a similar line of argument. The first two-thirds of his novel feel like a waste of time and I would have preferred more contents on artificial intelligence. Neither the movie nor the book deserve that title, because what we get is more a treatise on artificial emotion. And how easily could have Asimov shortcut this theme, if he had allowed his engineers to reverse program the mecha's imprint, something much more difficult to succeed within an org's psyche. Review. For Steven Spielberg's sci-fi drama AI, artificial intelligence was misunderstood when it came out in 2001, specifically by me. The movie started life as a Stanley Kubrick project that he gave to Spielberg, who directed it after Kubrick died in 1999. At the time, I thought it was too sentimental and not cerebral or frightening, like 2001, A Space Odyssey. There didn't seem to be enough of Kubrick's fear of technology and his dim view of humanity in AI and too much of Spielberg's sweeping spectacle. But I recently rewatched it, and I was wrong. The movie is grim. My God, it's also far more self-aware than I ever gave it credit. Spielberg understands his own work enough that he subverts it in AI. A sort of gift to Kubrick, a student demonstrating that they understood the assignment. AI is about David, a lifelike robot programmed to love and who is so good at wanting to be loved and loving his adopted parents that they abandon him in a dying world where humans torture robots who feel pain. The scene where David is abandoned in the woods by his mother during my recent viewing shocked me. David doesn't know he's a product that came in a box designed to fill an emptiness in a human heart. David was unaware of his purpose. Ironically, that is the human condition. David is played by Joel Osment when he was 12 years old in a profoundly mature and nuanced performance. Jude Law also shows up as a sex robot who is so good at making women want him he makes their husbands violently jealous. It is a disturbing movie about who will grieve for humanity long after we've killed ourselves off. This brings me to the scene that I can't stop thinking about. A couple of scenes. These moments went right over my head the first time I saw them. This time, though, they clobbered me. The end of 2001, A Space Odyssey is hopeful. The message is that man can and will evolve, but AI disagrees. The human race is doomed, and one day, our technology impossibly advanced, godlike thinking machines will mourn us as best they can. In AI, David's quest to become a real boy ends with him and his companion, a sentient teddy bear, trapped in an amphibious airship underwater amongst the ruins of Coney Island, staring ahead at a carnival statue of the Blue Fairy, the magical being who turned Pinocchio from wood into flesh and blood. The pair sit, transfixed, for thousands of years until they are discovered during a new ice age on Earth by his descendants. Elegant crystalline robots wrestling with the big questions about the meaning of life their creators once asked. These artificial intelligences are almost worshipful of David, who they refer to as a living memory of the human race. However, David is not interested in the dramatic ways the world has changed during his millennia-long slumber. However, he still functions according to his original programming. He wants to love and be loved, and when asked what he wants by the futuristic robots, he is very frank. He wants what he always wanted, which was the unconditional love of his mother, a long-dead woman who thought of David like a toy or pet. The thinking machines can grant him his wish. They have the technology, although imperfect, a way to restore life. One of them explains how to David as they sit in a museum-like recreation of the room he grew up in. We began a project that would make it possible to recreate the living body of a person long dead from the DNA in a fragment of bone or mummified skin. The robot continues to gently explain that the experiment was a failure, for those resurrected only lived through a single day of renewed life. This is the plot of Jurassic Park. By the way, the only difference is instead of humans recreating dinosaurs from DNA samples of blood inside a mosquito trapped in amber, It's robots growing humans from strands of hair in a laboratory, humans with memories, and the lifespan of a mayfly. David is warned not to explain anything to Monica, his mother, otherwise, she would become frightened, and everything would be spoiled. The only way they'd know this, of course, is by trial and error. She will not be the first. There were others. Who knows how many humans these robots recreated over how many years, decades, or centuries. Maybe a few were alive for only a few minutes or an hour or two before dying suddenly. That's the scientific process. Who knows how long it took these robots to discover that 24 hours was the maximum time they could give an ancient biological life form. What a horror. Imagine waking up one day only to be told you died long ago, as did everyone you loved, and their children and their children's children, and the entire human race, gone, that you are alone, an experiment, and very soon, you will die again, fall asleep and fall into oblivion. I'd scream. How many humans did these robots observe screaming and crying and raging and begging for a little more time? A little more life? I know there is a fear that artificial intelligence will one day create robot overlords that will wipe out humanity, but humanity will take care of that without any help. Spielberg's movie, inspired by Kubrick, sees a different fate. AI is a gentle revenge story. In a way, it's about the toy that finds a way to play with the mommy who threw it away. At the end of time, little David, the robot boy, gets his wish. What if Pinocchio went mad? 150-word reviews is a free newsletter if you're a subscriber. Thanks. If not, sign up. My opinions on movies are mercifully shardy cents, and my essays are full of feelings. A hearty thank you to my few but mighty paid subscribers who help me pay my many bills. Review. 5 Sometimes passion for one project reigns supreme in one's decision-making. This could be said for famed filmmaker Steven Spielberg, who actually passed over directing 2001's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone to make sci-fi drama AI, artificial intelligence. Introducing theatergoers to tragic android child David, the move to take on AI, artificial intelligence was a bold one, but for Spielberg, is arguably his most endearing film 15 years following its release. Released on June 29, 2001, AI, artificial intelligence is the long-gestating brainchild of legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. Suffering through 2 decades of development starts, stops, and transitions, it went through showbiz hell. The journey began back in 1982 when Kubrick acquired the rights to Brian Aldiss' short story, Super Toys Last All Summer Long. Years passed, where he hired various writers to do a screen treatment, including Aldiss himself. In 1995, Kubrick asked Steven Spielberg to take over, feeling the film better suited Spielberg's style. Even then, the movie didn't gain momentum until Kubrick's death in 1999. With respect to Kubrick, Spielberg left much of his influence in the film, gifting viewers a mesmerizing, disturbing, yet fitting swan song from the late master of movie-making. Following Mecca child David, Haley Joel Osment, The Sixth Sense 1999, Pay It Forward 2000, and his robot bear Teddy, Jack Angel, Toy Story 1995, Monster University 2013, David is a prototype android made specifically to love a family who imprints with him. The film both parallels the ideas of and directly references classic 1883 story The Adventures of Pinocchio, but with a dystopian backdrop of futuristic technology and political hot topics. His parents, Henry, Sam Roberts, American Beauty 1999, Life as a House 2001, and Monica Swinton, Frances O'Connor, Bedazzled 2000, The Conjuring 2 2016, placed their biological son Martin, Jake Thomas, The Cell 2000, Corey in the House TV series, in suspended animation, waiting on a hopeless cure for a rare disease. Henry works for Cybertronics, the makers of David, and is given the opportunity to test David with his family. Monica is hesitant, feeling she is replacing Martin, but soon comes to love David, often reading Pinocchio to him at bedtime. She eventually imprints with him, locking in his love for her. A cure is later found for Martin, but when he comes home, he is jealous of David, eventually convincing his father that David is a danger to the family. Henry tells Monica to take David back to Cybertronics to be destroyed, but she cannot, having formed a real bond with him. Instead, she abandons him and Teddy in a distant forest. David is hurt and confused, but eventually remembers the blue fairy from Pinocchio. He embarks on a quest to find her so he can become a real boy and have his mommy love him again. Along the way, David and Teddy meet Jigalo Joe, Jude Law, Enemy at the Gates 2001, Sherlock Holmes 2009, a rogue mecha male prostitute. He is programmed to love, like David, but in the physical sense only. They must survive in a world where global warming has turned coastal cities into flooded ruins and anti-mecha sentiment streams from a much decreased human population. They escape a flash fair, then travel to Rouge City, a resort town where they consult with holographic Siri-esque helper Dr. No, Robin Williams, Good Will Hunting 19997, Night at the Museum series. He leads them to flooded Manhattan, atop a ruined building where they find David's creator, Professor Alan Hobby, William Hurt, Dark City 1998, Into the Wild 2007, who created David as a substitute for the loss of his own child of the same name. Here, David finds that he is not unique, only the first in a mass production of David models. His existential crisis leads him to try and commit suicide by stepping off of the skyscraper and plunging into the ocean. Underneath the water, trapped with Teddy in the amphibicopter they flew to Manhattan in, David finds a Coney Island statue of the Blue Fairy. He stares at the statue and asks, repeatedly, for her to turn him into a real boy, until an ice age freezes the ocean around them and his internal power source drains away. Spielberg, along with directing, wrote the final screenplay that closely followed the treatment done by writer Ian Watson. It was Spielberg's first film screenplay credit since 1982's Poltergeist. Kathleen Kennedy and Bonnie Curtis produced alongside Spielberg. Both Stanley Kubrick Productions and Amblin Entertainment produced the film, while distribution was covered by DreamWorks in North America and Warner Brothers Pictures internationally. Venerable John Williams wrote the film score. The cast delivered fantastic performances, with Osment and Law executing their roles as androids exceptionally. Their exploration of emotions and how to work, as mechas, within the confines of unregulated humanity highlighted the ideas behind the film. Robin Williams, as the voice of Dr. No, was inspired casting. 2 years before, he played a lead role in similarly themed 1999's Bicentennial Man. Ben Kingsley, Chris Rock, and Meryl Streep all had voice roles in the film, and ABC's Agents of SHIELD star Clark Gregg played a super nerd. It is honestly difficult to know where to begin investigating the impact of this movie. Emotionally, this ranks at a level near 1988's Grave of the Fireflies and 2009's The Road. It swims in themes ranging from environmental destruction to the definitions of life and love. The problem, though, is that AI has flown under the radar of popular culture. Many people remember it when mentioned, but its parallels to today's society and predictions it offers are rarely discussed, due in part to its slower pace and intellectual plot. Some critics went so far as to say the film did not work, but often ignored the inherent questions the movie raised, many which by their nature cannot be readily answered. Thus, it has not had the cultural awareness it richly deserves. Cherry-picking a bit, global warming is now an even hotter topic than it has ever been, pun intended. Sci-fi has often read and predicted real-life trends in the world, and it seems that, despite what may or may not be causing it, the world is in for serious ecological shifts. Movies like 2008's The Happening beat viewers over the head with oversimplified messages like this, but AI uses it as a background, or as one of a variety of self-destructive behaviors by humans that lead to the setting of the film. It is a simple message, but profound in how it is used as background paralleling real-world changes. The advancement of technology is used in the same way. Artificial intelligence has been debated for a long time, and even reflects classical philosophers' ideas on creating machines that could compete with the gods. In this film, David, Joe, and other mechas are not portrayed as the enemy, but are used to ask what is life and how do we recognize it. Humanity rails against the purity of the mechas, mirrors showing their own depravities, with David acting as the paragon of love. Beyond these things, artificial intelligence examines the nature of family, corporate interest over that of individuals, and people's need for validation and inclusion in American Blue Fairy within a European setting populated by various Italian and English characters. Yet curiously and inexplicably, the only English as opposed to American accent that we hear in AI is that of the off-screen narrator. So the conception of a 21st century in AI that is generically and exclusively American already dates the film as a 20th century conception. Ironically, Stapleton's own first book, in 1930, Last and First Men, purporting to recount the remaining 2 billion years of human history, founders at least partially as prophecy on a similarly short-sighted premise of an Americanized planet. Unlike many of my colleagues, I can't simply accept AI as either a film by Steven Spielberg or a film by Stanley Kubrick. I can only read it as a film deriving from the will and consciousness of both of them, one alive and one dead, and encompassing all the dialectical contradictions that this strange collaboration entails. In a way, these contradictions become those of cinema itself, what Gilberto Perez has called the material ghost, which confound us about what is living or dead, animate or inanimate, human or robotica, or, in the terms of AI, orga or mecca. When he was alive, Kubrick proposed that Spielberg, a friend who first read a treatment for AI in 1984, direct the film. He gave 2 reasons: because Spielberg could direct the boy actor more quickly than he could, before the boy had time to visibly age, and because he believed Spielberg would be more adept in handling the story's emotions. Perhaps he was also correctly thinking of Spielberg as the only true successor of Walt Disney, whose major emotional theme is the traumatic loss or absence of parents, especially in Pinocchio, Dumbo, 1941, Bambi, 1942, and Song of the South, 1946. But it's worth adding that Kubrick arrived at the notion of Spielberg directing AI only after he explored and then rejected the possibility of a robot playing the robot hero. To my mind, Haley Joel Osment's performance as David is one of the greatest child performances in the history of cinema, but for Kubrick, it seems that any human performance in the role would necessarily qualify as a compromise and concession. So it isn't surprising that the film makes us care chiefly about the robot characters, not about the human ones. After he died, Kubrick's widow and brother-in-law again proposed that Spielberg make the film, because otherwise it would never exist, and Spielberg, after agreeing, wrote his own script derived from the materials generated or supervised by Kubrick, a 40-page treatment by Ian Watson, inspired both by a 1969 Brian Aldiss story, Super Toys Last All Summer Long, and by Carlo Collodi's 1883 novel Pinocchio, and over 1,000 detailed drawings by Chris Baker. I suspect that Spielberg brought far more faithfulness and seriousness to this project, at least within his own limitations, than he brought to his 1993 adaptation of Thomas Keneally's novel Schindler's List, or, for that matter, to the subject of the Holocaust. But this is only a suspicion on my part, based mainly on Spielberg's various statements. He has published many of Baker's drawings, both as DVD extras and in a large format book about AI edited by Kubrick's brother-in-law Jan Harlan and Jane M. Struthers, but virtually none of Watson's treatment apart from a few stray pages reproduced in the latter has become available. I must confess that, even though Spielberg may have made the film's beginning and ending more emotionally powerful than Kubrick could have, his less focused handling of the film's middle section as a succession of fairground attractions, Flesh Fair, Rouge City, A Drowned Manhattan, and Coney Island, where the sense of spectacle periodically threatens to overwhelm the narrative, is somewhat less convincing. Arguably, the only sequence in the section that recovers the purity of the film's beginning and end is David's visit to the factory, where he discovers with horror not only his doppelganger Currenzinger but an endless, assembly line procession of Davids. Yet even here, the film falters by misplacing Hobby, the principal villain whom neither the film nor David himself ever quite succeeds in morally confronting. By this time, The narrative has become so disgruntled with humanity that it can only turn away from Hobby and his co-workers to concentrate on David and Jigalo Joe and their separate forms of existential doom. Only Teddy, the film's Jiminy Cricket, seems exempt from the wretchedness of their immortality. Even Joe, who lacks David's capacity for love, becomes morally superior to Hobby, whose morbid love for his dead son led to the blighted creation of David. Even though Joe, unlike Monica and Hobby, can't experience death, there is no extinction in the film that feels more tragic than his as he's being reeled away like a captured fish. When he says to David, I was, a forward summary of his existential dilemma. Cinema lives, but is this a blessing or a malediction? Review. 8 The vulnerability and curiosity of children have been a constant subject throughout Steven Spielberg's career. From the boyish wonder of Elliot in E.T. to the curiosity and sensitivity of Jim in Empire of the Sun, Spielberg has trained his audiences to recognize these youthful adventures. But what he presents in AI, artificial intelligence, is something unexpectedly divergent. AI is a dark fairy tale complex, full of literary allusions, stitching genres together in episodic fashion. And Spielberg tackles an adventure of biblical proportions. In the beginning, and I say that with all its biblical implications, an image of the sea, often a symbol for maternity or destruction, is splashed across the screen while the narrator, Ben Kingsley, explains that in the not-so-distant future drastic climate change will lead to drowned coastal cities and global starvation. In order to conserve the resources that remain, humanity has developed advanced robots called mecca and stabilized society by strictly licensing pregnancies. The government enforced regulations on pregnancies, which are eerily reminiscent of China's one-child policy, only worse, have left many couples yearning in vain for children. As a result, the mecha-producing company Cybertronics builds David, Haley Joel Osment, the first of its kind artificial child to assuage the loneliness and suffering of childless adults. What's different about David is that he is the first mecha programmed to have real, or at least simulated, feelings. As his creator Professor Alan Hobby, William Hurt, puts it, David is the first mecha made to love. David is adopted by a couple whose only son, Martin, Jake Thomas, lies frozen in cryostasis, afflicted with what they're told is an incurable disease. Henry, Sam Roberts, a Cybertronics employee, sees David then as a kind of sensory toy, a tool to help his wife Monica, Frances O'Connor, begin to mourn their terminally ill son. Monica is at first horrified. David's skin, unlike that of the other mechas, is so realistic that her husband would even consider there could be a replacement for their real son. Programmed with the capacity to love, David should theoretically develop an inner life of metaphors and dreams once the imprinting protocol has been activated by his adoptive parents. But such advancement in technology brings consequences. While other mechas perform simple functions as soldiers, servants, and even prostitutes, a child mecha can never be resold. Their imprinting is permanent and attaches them emotionally to a particular person, so it would cause painful confusion if they were transferred to new owners. That means that if parents become tired of their child mecha, they must be returned to Cybertronics for destruction. The first third of the movie leans into the discomfort and anxiety that David's presence in the home creates. Silently appearing behind Monica on several occasions, David seems plucked from a Stephen King novel rather than a Steven Spielberg film. Osment's slow and stiff movements, shockingly blue eyes, and creeping smile also give him the uncanny appearance of a lifelike doll, a Pinocchio illusion that, although obvious, the film cleverly tapes into throughout. David's inquisitiveness into human interactions and seeming ability to imitate them almost instantly brings both dread and curiosity. There is a surprisingly unsettling scene when David answers an urgent and frantic call from Henry but functions as a speakerphone by projecting the adult voice through his child-sized mouth. It is a trope that pervades fairy tale stories like Pinocchio and also horror stories like Frankenstein. The idea that simulated human life is both fascinating and riddled with fear and uncertainty. That fear and uncertainty dominate David's new home until Monica slowly becomes enchanted by the boy. One of the more poignant moments of the film comes when Monica decides to initiate David's imprinting protocol, effectively turning on the irreversible circuit breaker that will make David love her unequivocally and eternally. He catches Monica off guard by uttering the word mommy, at which she immediately melts in a way that makes you wonder how long she has been yearning to hear that word again. David folds himself into Monica's arms, no longer in a stiff robotic way but in a warm and childish way that signals Monica will forever love him in return. But not all children are created equal in this story. When Martin returns home, having miraculously recovered from his disease, David is met with a conniving, sarcastic, and mischievous child. Humans, it seems, let jealousy disrupt their own ability to love. The rivalry builds until one of Martin's friends attempts to see if David can feel pain, leading David to accidentally endanger Martin's life. Here, Spielberg's probing reaches existential though ambiguous depths. If we side with David in the mistreatment of him and his mecca brethren, as we are clearly asked to do, then are we glossing over the best of human nature or agreeing that human nature is fundamentally flawed and unsalvageable? The truth likely lies somewhere in the darker middle, which is exactly where the entire narrative shifts. Henry can see no solution but to return this sensory toy to Cybertronics for destruction. Monica on the other hand has become attached. No matter how much she tries to convince herself that David is not real, she can't fully believe it. Even if David's emotions are simulated, she cannot bear to watch him break down in tears and pleading aid, and neither can the audience as Monica abandons David in the woods rather than turn him in for destruction. The tone shifts abruptly as David finds himself in a dark, mythic adventure quest. He is convinced by rather childlike but endearing logic that if he finds the real blue fairy from the story of Pinocchio then he can become a real boy and Monica will love him again. Accompanied by a braggadocious sex slave mecca named Jigalo Joe, Jude Law, and a super toy teddy bear, voiced by Jack Angel, the three friends are quickly captured by a gang of mecha hunters. One of Spielberg's more stunning images throughout the movie, a large full moon which rises quickly over a hill, harkening back to the famous scenes from E.T., is cleverly inverted when it is revealed to be an enormous air balloon captained by the gang's leader, Lord Johnson Johnson, Brandon Gleeson. The three friends are rounded up and brought to a flesh fair, also tagged as a celebration of life, a sort of combination gladiator games and Southern revival where humans delight in demolishing artificiality and promoting a purely human future. Making their way out of this flesh fair, through the glitzy debaucherous zone of Rouge City, and eventually to a half-flooded Manhattan, David's sole purpose is to find the blue fairy who can give him the only thing he desires, the gift of a human life. Spielberg opts for a final dramatic shift in the last scenes, likely in search of the sublime and biblical ending rather than the succinct and tied-off of his previous ventures like Jurassic Park or Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. Pushing into stranger and unexpected territory, the story leaps thousands of years into the future to see what has become of David. The very end, which viewers should really witness for themselves, ties together both the cathartic experience of the family and the taking desire of a child to find solace in the simple act of being loved. The questions that remain at the end of the film should inspire discussion. We are certainly reminded of a dark and simple truth: when humanity begins to regulate and control life, it slowly begins to destroy it. Yet digging into that truth uncovers myriad questions. Why is it that we simulate real life? What does it mean to be real and human? What has happened to humanity that we constantly need to be reminded of our very nature? As the New York Times A.O. Scott put it in his initial 2001 review of AI, refusing to cuddle us or lull us into easy sleep, Mr. Spielberg locates the unspoken moral of all our fairy tales. To be real is to be mortal, to be human is to love, to dream, and to perish. AI. Artificial Intelligence's MPA rating is PG-13 for some sexual content and violent images. Directed and written by Steven Spielberg based on the screen story by Ian Watson and the short story Super Toys Last All Summer Long by Brian Aldiss. Director of Photography, Janusz Kaminski. Edited by Michael Kahn. Music by John Williams. Production designer, Rick Carter. Costumes by Bob Ringwood. Makeup effects by Stan Winston. Visual effects by Dennis Muren and Scott Farrer. Practical effects by Michael Lantieri. The film was dedicated to producer-director Stanley Kubrick, who began production of the movie but shelved the project as special effects technology was not advanced enough to achieve his vision for the film. Kubrick, before his death, decided Spielberg was a better fit for the film and should take over the project. Spielberg has since credited much of the movie's script and inspiration to Kubrick, particularly the first and final thirds of the film. Running time, 146 minutes.